Welcome to Solo in the Shop. Grab your respirator and Bluetooth headphones as this episode tackles the sometimes sticky topic of epoxy and its place in the woodshop. Whether you are a hobbyist, weekend warrior, making commissions for friends and family, or already a full-time maker, if you are solo in your shop, this is the show for you. I'm Ronald Lowe's, the host of Solo in the Shop, a woodworking podcast discussing everything from current projects, tools and techniques, decisions around running a small business, and much more. So if you frequently find yourself alone and covered in sawdust, follow my journey and we can be solo in the shop together. Today's episode is all about epoxy resin. I want to get into the science of what epoxy is and isn't, its place in the woodshop, pros and cons, and even some alternatives to epoxy if, like me, you still get requests for river tables. I will start by saying that my position on epoxy is that I use it pretty regularly for river tables as well as other applications that we'll discuss in a few minutes. The news is saturated with talk about microplastics and recycling and the inescapable truth that humans are damaging the environment with our disposable products and waste. There's no denying that. At the same time, just like we extend the usable life of trees by making durable furniture, I feel a responsibility when asked to make with epoxy to build something lasting and beautiful. Novel, disposable, and generally crappy is not how I want to work. Now you may be wondering, is epoxy plastic? The unhelpful answer is sort of, but we can do better than that. Let's slip into our lab coats and talk about what epoxy actually is. There are two general categories of epoxy: acrylic resin epoxy and polyester resin epoxy. They both can be used interchangeably for most applications, but each has its own chemical makeup and properties. As we get into this, note that I do not have a chemistry degree, so my pronunciation may be suspect. But here goes. Acrylic resin and polyester resin are both types of thermosetting polymers used in various applications, including coatings, castings, and moldings. Here are the key differences between the two. The first is their chemical composition. Acrylic resin is derived from acrylic acid or methacrylic acid, and usually contains monomers like methyl methacrylate. When polymerized, it forms a polymer with acrylic or methacrylic repeating units. Polyester resin, on the other hand, is formed through a reaction of dicarboxylic acid with a diol, resulting in ester linkages. This type of resin often contains unsaturated polyester oligomers and a reactive diluent like styrene. So those are the chemicals. The properties of each of these. The acrylic resin typically offers better clarity, UV resistance, and weatherability compared to polyester resin. It has excellent optical properties, making it suitable for applications requiring high transparency, such as clear coatings and lenses. Polyester resin is known for high strength, impact resistance, and chemical resistance. It's commonly used in fiberglass composites, boat building, automotive parts, and anything else where durability and toughness are essential. Based on these properties, acrylic resin is typically used in applications where optical clarity and weather resistance are crucial, such as outdoor signs, aquariums, and architectural glazing. Polyester finds widespread use in fiberglass reinforced plastics, laminates, castings, and molds. So now the question is epoxy plastic? Both acrylic and polyester resins are classified as synthetic polymers, which fall under the broader category of plastics. However, they differ from typical plastics called thermoplastic polymers in that epoxy undergoes irreversible chemical reactions during curing, also called cross-linking, and cannot be remolded or reshaped once hardened. This makes them thermosetting plastics, distinct from thermoplastics that can be melted and reshaped multiple times. This thermosetting plastic characteristic of not being able to be melted and reshaped is why epoxy resin is not recyclable. Regular plastic, thermoplastics, can be recycled because they can be melted and reshaped into something completely different. So that is the key difference in the ecological impact of resin versus plastic. So as we take our lab coats off and we put our shop apron on, we think about what are the uses for epoxy. So there's three that occur to me right off, and the first is joinery. So epoxy can be used to strengthen and reinforce wood joints, especially in cases where traditional glue, Type Bond 3, my favorite, may not suffice. It creates a durable bond that can withstand stress and strain. You can search around online and find plenty of side-by-side comparison videos showing the strength of epoxy as compared to various wood glues and adhesives. Epoxy is good for wood stabilization. It can fill cracks, voids, and knots, preventing further damage and adding structural integrity to the piece. This is particularly useful for live edges or highly figured wood where the natural voids or cracks may be present and diminish the strength of the wood. This is probably, besides river tables, my most common use of epoxy. When I find pieces that need filling, depending on the size, I will use epoxy because it will soak into the wood and harden and add stability. Epoxy is also used for decorative inlays in woodwork, such as river tables, where colored epoxy is poured into the carved out sections of the wood to create striking designs. Additionally, epoxy can be mixed with various materials like glitter, pigment, or even natural objects like stones and shells for artistic effect. So those are three reasons to use epoxy in your wood shop. So what are some of the reasons why you wouldn't want to use epoxy? So here's some of the arguments against epoxy. There are toxicity and safety concerns. Epoxy typically contains chemicals that can be harmful if not handled properly. They can emit strong fumes during curing, and the chemicals can be hazardous if inhaled. Additionally, epoxy resins usually require careful mixing and application procedures to minimize health risks. The second argument is the difficulty of reversal. Once the epoxy is cured, it forms a strong and permanent bond that is difficult to reverse. This can be problematic if adjustments or repairs are needed later on. Unlike traditional wood glues, epoxy cannot be easily softened or dissolved, making it challenging to disassemble or modify joints without damaging the wood. Another consideration is the cost. Epoxy resin can be relatively expensive compared to other woodworking adhesives. Depending on the project size and complexity, the cost of epoxy materials can add up very quickly. Additionally, some epoxy formulations require specific additives or equipment, further increasing the overall expense. I know that when I am quoting epoxy work, my base cost is $100 per gallon. And that means passing cost on to the customer closer to $200 a gallon so that my time and equipment are factored in. Now, customers still ask for river tables all the time. I get a request at least once a month to make a new river table. There are alternatives to epoxy when making river tables. Obviously, the first alternative is just don't make a river table. However, some customers will have their heart set on it, and depending on your business and your shop, you may need to make that river table. You also have the option to make a river table using glass instead of epoxy. This is a lot more work and possibly doesn't save any money, but the effect, the end result, is amazing. So where we would normally pour epoxy into a river, we would router out a channel that follows that natural live edge, making a shelf that glass can fit, and then have a glass company come template that, they can cut it, temper it, drop that in. Adding color to glass is also an option. Related to that would be making it shadow boxed. So putting some kind of wood floor on the underside of the river and then glass on top, using the same technique on the top and bottom. And that allows for adding items, whether it's shells or stones or a Star Wars scene. It's a way to put those things in there without drowning them in epoxy. Another option, filling a river with concrete with or without some extra color, can create a very unique table. Similar to using glass, you could consider using stone. The last alternative that occurs to me is one that I am secretly working on, and that is making a river table filled with wood. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't know how it's going to come out yet, but the idea is similar to the glass inlay idea, but I would template the river and then cut that out of another species of wood and then try and put it all together so that you get some contrast in the wood to make that river, but then it would get glued up and joined like any other tabletop. So when a customer asks for a river table, you may be asking yourself, is the customer always right? The answer is yes, if you're in the business of building commissions. If your conscience doesn't allow you to make it, then don't. But beyond trying to present reasons and alternatives to the client, they have the option to find the decor they want in their space. If you personally don't want to make a resin-based river, or you just want to stretch your creative wings, try any and all of these options, or get creative and use something novel. Maybe it works, maybe not, or maybe you will stumble into the next big design trend. That's all I have for you this week. Hopefully I gave you some food for thought when it comes to epoxy's place in your shop. Until next time, stay safe. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out to me at solointheshop@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you got value from it and would like to help the show grow, I'd appreciate a review wherever you listen. Be sure to check the show notes for links to my socials or any extra stuff we discussed today. Until next time, stay safe in your shop, and we'll talk again soon.